Manishma, what's up? Anashim, Mishpoka, Bayit Yasharel, Shalom Aleikum, Shalom Yehudim, and the house of Yasharel. We greet you all, Bayit Yasharel, that's feeling alienated and separated because we're so separate from one another, but yet you know you are a part of the grafted house of Yasharel. Shalom Aleikum, and we are celebrating Chag Sameach Shavuot, replacement theology corrections, made void, canceled replacement theology, and restoring the continued grafted into Yahuwah, Bayit Yasharel. I have a color brochure that you can use for yourself. Some people don't like the color brochure because it has a lot of information there, showing the pagan places and people. But also, I also have a 3-page printout of the correction of the words. Once you get the printout or this pamphlet, you can read any book, any scripture, and be able to correct the words as you read, because you're memorizing what is the correct words and what's the incorrect words, and how to use clean English words to the best of your ability to read somebody else's Bible or a regular Christian Bible at the same time. It's great to have a Hallelujah ISR or any of the other helps of even at Sefer, but when you already got the words memorized, you can read any scripture and know how to correct them in action. How many of you know that since they have replaced them? Now, I told you before, but I'll mention it, that when I was in Bible college, and the teacher said, the professor is going to explain on replacement theology. Of course, he explained it towards more Catholicism and did not know that he was a part of the daughters of Catholicism, poor guy. And he made the term replacement theology. And I raised my hand and I said, well, theology, theos, that's GODs or mighty ones. So we're going to replace all the mighty ones. We're going to replace their names. And he just got quiet to me. Now, this came to me years ago when I was still in the Christian community. And the Father was showing me what that term meant of replacing everything. Everything in the Word being replaced, changed, transformed, cookie dough'd out, and baked and served to the people in each denomination in their own manner that they want to serve it. And so you can use this one, bridge you from one spot to the other, as they took us across a bridge and burnt it. Our grandfathers took our grandfathers across a bridge, then burnt it, that they couldn't go back, till it's finally forgotten the clean words, and giving them unclean books and unclean words of replacement theology. Well, we want to do is get you to cross the bridge now and burn that old bridge of Catholicism and the Christianity of form of using pagan words. And how many of you know that every idle word men shall speak, they shall give account thereof in the day of judgment? One time I was teaching in an Indian reservation, a Native American reservation, and one of the tribal leaders' wife stood up and said, "You mean like idle words?" I said, "Yeah." But she said, "No, you don't understand. Idle, like idle talk, idle words." Yeah, all truth is parallel. It could be both ways, not only an image of an idol, but idolistic, but also words that are idle don't really mean nothing, don't go nowhere. It's like a car sitting there idle. Okay, so here's also a quick list I always like to use for a demonstration of the final calendar, working our way onto Shavuot, and to express that great celebration of Shavuot, and that portion of the completion of that barley and beginning of the wheat, but the barley harvest, and that lifting up that free will offering, wave offering that the Kohanim would do also during this time. Praise Yah. Shabbat Shalom, and it's great to be with you all in your homes, in your tablet, in your cell phones. Thank you for welcoming me. So I feel so edified and built up and prepared to share with you today what we're going to share. And we also rebuke, bind, and cast down anything that the enemy of the prince of the air will try to slow down, buffet down, malfunction our frequencies, our Wi-Fi frequencies, our Zoom frequencies, and we speak dominion over the prince of the air. And as we pray over the technology, as Ed said, as we pray over the technology, we appreciate it, but we bind any interference of the enemy trying to come in and try to throw a monkey wrench and stop anybody's phone or anybody's service from malfunctioning in this fellowship today. And we ask it to flow in the Ruach and flow of your anointing, Father, because we have authority and dominion over the principalities, the powers, the rulers of darkness of the world, and the spiritual wickedness in high places. For we are standing on the promises of that dominion authority, Father, as we grow up as sons and daughters of Eloah in the Shem of Yahushua. Amen and amen, amen. We're going to begin in the book of Ruth, and we're going to go to Perek Ahut, Pasuk, Esarim, Shataim, or Esarim, Shataim. We're going to go to chapter 1, verse 22. That's going to be our beginning book as I go into Esor now. Now, how many have knew in your lab, and some of you that have been involved this for a while, you know that the book of Ruth is very important among even the Jewish community of reading it during the time of the parashat for the purpose of Shavuot. We're doing it a little earlier because when we do Shavuot video streaming, we want to emphasize in some other scriptures, and but we're going to go ahead and read this. This is a great story because it's the story of the kinsman redeemer. Now, of course, in the Jewish community, as even some of the Messianic, they don't understand that Yahushua is our kinsman redeemer, especially in the Christian community. They don't understand that. But we are going to magnify that today, and then we're going to go back and look in Exodus chapter 9 and 34, as well as Devarim. And we're going to bounce around a little bit with this, and we're going to look at some of the Hebrew words that are here concerning the kinsman redeemer that are hidden using other words while you're reading it in the English translations. And it is written, and it came to be in the Yamim, when the rulers ruled, that there was a scarcity of food in the land. And a man from Bai Lechem Yehuda went to sojourn in the fields of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. Now, if I were to pause there for fun for a minute, and it says here they were sojourning, okay? Now, in this particular, it says ger, okay? Ger. It's not goy, it's not goyim, it's ger. It's another term in Hebrew. I know we know Gershom, one of the sons of Moshe, means I'm a sojourner or a person that is how should I say, what was the word of that name? It means someone is a stranger. So you would hear the word stranger, you would hear nations, because under the pagan Catholic word gentilis, Gentile, is the word ethnos in Greek, which is supposed to be nations, which is goy or goyim, right? But ger is a cleaner word, somebody that is a sojourner, okay? And Gershom is more of the word for somebody that's a believer of the tribe, of the bloodline, but he's a stranger because he's been gone so long. Or somebody that's a stranger coming back into the camp or never been in the camp because there's several generations of children have passed and they look different, they dress different, and everything else. Okay. How many know today, if the house of Bayit Yasharel were to come up into the future and they were to walk in the streets of Jerusalem, First of all, they wouldn't recognize the streets, but they wouldn't recognize the clothing of the black and white people wearing black and white, gray and white, or gold stripers, gold and white, or any other form of rabbinical or Ashkenazi clothing, because that seems like strange to them, of the house of Yasharel from years ago. So Gur is one of the, now there's also Gur, another form, and there's another form of a word for pagan idol worshiper, but this one's a stranger in a strange place. For them, they are not journeying into Israel's a strange place, they're journeying into the land of the Moabites as a strange place. And they sojourned in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. And the name of the man was Elimelech. Now, in some translations, that, well, it says Elimelech, but now, if you were to read that with a correct understanding, you understand his name means the mighty or father of Melech. Okay, it's not Malak as a messenger, but Melech as a sovereign. So he's the father Melech. Now you know that the father Melech is a very powerful name that came on the scene during the time of Abraham met, and it turned out, you would think that this guy living 300 years, but actually it was an ancestral title of a certain Melech that whenever somebody became the sovereign, he took on the title of Father Melech, okay, or Mighty Father Melech. So, and then it says here, so if we go in and we look at that word, which is it was a nice word to look at, okay, and basically it just said king, right? The king, but actuality it's 2 separate words. It has mighty, and then it has sovereign, malak, Melech. Okay, but in Hebrew it's a little different. It's the mighty of all of them, or the father of all of them. And then and the name of the wife was Naomi, and the name of his 2 sons were Malon and Kilion and Ephrathis and Bethlehem Yehuda, and they went to the fields of Moab and came to be there. And Elimelech's husband of Naomi died, and she was left with her 2 sons. Now, in the Christian or in the scriptures, they don't tell you what the father and the sons died of. There are rabbinical stories, some fact fiction, right? That there was a problem in the land and there was a quarrel and they were killed. Father was killed, then the sons were killed after because of a dispute. And there's rabbinical Jewish stories on Jewish TV online where you can see their theory in the rabbinical Talmud of what happened to the husband and to the 2 sons, how they got caught in the crossfire of a political situation and they were killed. Okay, and it says, and they 2 wives of the women of Moab, the name of the one was Oprah, and the name of the other Ruth, and they dwelt there about 10 years. Somebody should tell Oprah that Oprah is a Moabitess name, and she's the one that did not follow Ruth. Okay, Naomi. So, and she claims she has a biblical name, but yeah, it's a Moabitess name. She don't realize that. All right, verse 5, and Nalon and Kilon also died, both of them. So the woman was bereaved of her 2 sons and her husband. And she rose up and with her 2 daughters-in-law and returned to the fields from the fields of Moab, for she had heard in the fields of Moab that Yahuwah had visited his people in giving them bread, like him. And she left the place where she was and her 2 daughters-in-law with her, and they went on the way to return to the land of Yehudah. And Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, go return each to your mother's house. Yahuwah show kindness to you as you have shown kindness to the dead and to me. And Yahuwah grant that you find rest, each in the house of her husband. Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices and wept. And they said to her, no, we shall go back with you to your people. But Naomi said, go back, my daughters. Why go with me? Have I still sons in my womb that they should become your husbands? And by tradition, the next son gets to marry the wife of the dead, that he could produce seed of his older brothers. Of course, Naomi's too old for that. That's not going to happen. But the father had another way to get the kinsman redeemer in action. But Naomi said, go back, my daughters. Why go with me? Have I still sons in my womb that they should become your husbands? Now, this is the second time she's telling them, go back, my daughters, go your way, for I am too old to have husbands. If I should say I have expectancy, even if I should have a husband tonight, should I also bear sons? Would you wait for them till they were grown? Would you shut yourself up not to have a husband? No, my daughters, for it is much more better for me than for you, because the hand of Yahuwah has gone out against me. Now, for read 14, traditionally realize this, that even in Israel today, they still do the Naomi 3 steps rejection of the sojourners today. If somebody were to go to a Yehudim or even rabbinical Jews, and they try to say, I want to convert, I want to be taught, I want to be corrected, I want to grow up, I want to learn Torah, I want to learn the ways of the house of Judaism, for them, for us is the house of Israel, they will shun you away. They will smile at you at the synagogue, or they ask you to sit in the back and try to shun you away. If you resist and stay there and you come back again, they will continue to shun you up to the third time, even if it takes a week or 2 or 3 Shabbats in their particular synagogues or shivas in the United States or Israel, because they're going by the traditions of what Ruth did. Okay, to shun them away. And if they consistent and they lift up their voices and wept, and Oprah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. So one was Oprah. She decided to go back. And how many, it's kind of funny that Oprah, in the Oprah Winfrey show, she's a backslidden Christian, and she as a part of not being a part of any form of her old Baptist Christianity. But Ruth clung to her, and she said, look, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her mighty ones. Go back, follow your sister-in-law. During this walk, they say traditionally that this took days, and she kept rising up in the journey, letting them know, we serve only one mighty one. We don't serve the same mighty ones that you do in your place of Moab. We eat different. We eat clean. We do this. You know that. Our clothing is different. So she's getting them ready. So she's adding discouragement to them in order to get them to be shunned to go back. Now, in the rabbinical stories, which I'm not going to get into it because we don't know if it's facts or fiction, they say in some other writings that they use this form of what they did to shun them to go back and discourage them to go back. So I've heard them do this in shuls and shivas, tell American Yehudim, you don't want to be a part of us. You're going to have to change your clothing. You're going to have to learn Hebrew. You're going to have to learn the right foods to eat. You're going to have to marry a Yehudi woman. You're going to have to do this. Try to discouraging them to go back to the being a goy or a ger, okay? Even back to America and practice Judaism in America, not in Israel. And they do this according to what they believe, according to this teaching of the book of Ruth. So if you never heard it before, this is common among them. I've had people come to me and say, well, I'm trying to go to a Jewish synagogue, and which the word synagogue is actually Catholic Latin. It was a word they called them. It's not what they called themselves. They called themselves either a yeshiva or a shul. And it's not Shiva for the pagan deity. It just sounds like it's a yeshiva or a shul. So, and that's their place of worship. Now, so they would try to traditionally do the same and discourage them. That you don't want to be a part of us. You have to sacrifice a lot. You got to learn all our prayers, but she discouraged them. But she decided to stay, Ruth, with Naomi. Your aloha is my aloha. An example of how the Goyim is grafted in among the chosen people is Ruth, this ex-Moabite woman, later on will become the grandmother, of David, which we all know traditionally, okay? Where you die, I die. Where I shall be buried, Yahuwah, do so to me, and more also, for death itself parts you and me. And when she saw that she was strengthened in herself to go with her, she ceased from speaking to her. So Naomi stopped trying to persuade her, discourage her, or throw little rocks on the road to keep her from going forward. Okay, and to go back. The story is that when this political thing happened, and they killed their husbands, first the father, then they came back and killed the husband, that they even threatened the two daughters because they married into the Yehuda, the family of Yehudi that were migrants, workers living in Moab. All right, among the Moabites. So they treated the migrant, at that point, they were the migrant workers, okay? And so they even threatened the women. That's why they fled with Naomi. But the story goes that Naomi told her, which is not scriptural, but that Naomi told her, well, it's been weeks or days now. They'll forget. You can go sneak to your family's house and be restored to your family's house. And once you're restored, then they'll forget who you're married and you'll be able to remarry. You never had children. You never had a chance to bear children. You can still marry into your own race of people, okay? And that's their traditional add-on of information. So, and then it says here, when they had come to Bethlehem, that all the city was moved because of them. And they said, is this Naomi? It must have been gone a while, okay? Naomi come with a few gray hairs, losing her husband, 2 sons, and one of her daughter-in-laws, and returns back with only one and no grandchildren. And she said to them, do not call me Naomi, call me Mar, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. And I went out filled, and Yahuwah has brought me back empty. Why do you call me Naomi? Since Yahuwah has witnessed against me, and the Almighty has done evil to me. She claims that harm is done. But, how many of you know the Father knows the end of the book? Loss is not loss, but when we pass, we wait for the resurrection of the just when we're keeping the right rule of the marriage covenant of Torah. Verse 22, very important verse, and thus Naomi returned. Now, remember that we're going to see now why there's things happening at the time of her returning. It was not only just to pack up and go, because there's a time of emergency, but there's events about to take place. And Ruth, the Moabitess, her daughter-in-law with her, who returned from the fields of Moab, and they came to Bethlehem at the beginning of barley harvest. So now it's the beginning of the barley harvest. Now we know there's the first fruits beginning, and then there's Pesach, because they wave that portion too. And then we have unleavened bread, and we have first fruits. But then we have also, now begins the count. because they're going to be working in the fields during Shavuot, 7 times 7. So this is the beginning of the barley harvest. In the barley harvest, which we know what that is, okay? We know the time frame. We know what it's about of that time frame in Bethlehem, the beginning of the harvest, which is the barley harvest. Now let's kind of dip in before we go to chapter 2 to that starting of the beautiful story, and we're going to go to Shemot, Exodus chapter 9, verse 31, 32, 9, 31, and 32. And the flax of the barley was smitten, for the barley was in the ear, and the flax was bold. But the wheat and the rye were not smitten, for they were not grown up. And I put this verse because this is where you can look at the timeline of what's going on while Israel was still in Egypt and the hail came down. Now we know when the harvest of barley and wheat and different, because there's 7 species of seven species of the barley, and then there's the wheat harvest after that. And of course Shavuot is 7 times 7, so it's dealing with 7. So during the wave offering there is 7 species of barley being waved. Okay, it's the number 7 with the 7. So now I added this. Now we know that the time of the harvest of the barley is different in Jerusalem than the lower altitude of Tel Aviv and also of Mitzrayim. They could come by week to 2 weeks to 3 weeks, different season because of temperature and the harvesting of that particular crop. So the harvest up in Bethlehem or Jerusalem, which is just a little higher altitude than Bethlehem, all right, it would be in the matter of different than in Tel Aviv or in Egypt. But I brought this up to kind of show you about the timeline also. Now go to Exodus chapter 34. Verse 21, 6 yamim you work, but on the 7th yom you rest. In plowing time and in harvest you rest. And perform the festival of weeks for yourselves, of the first fruits of wheat harvest, and the festival of ingathering at the turn of the year. 3 times in the year all your men are to appear before Yahuwah, our master, the Aloha of Yasharel. For I dispossess nations before you, and I shall enlarge your borders, and let no one covet your land when you go up to appear before Yahuwah, your Aloha, 3 times in the year. Okay. Now, just to kind of let you know that this feast is one of the 3 of the most important feasts to bring your offerings and gifts. Okay, you got Pesach, you got also, of course, when you're there for Pesach, you got Mazahot, Feast of Unleavened Bread. But then the count also of Shavuot is very important. Okay, so it's just 3 times a year. Your men shall not appear before you. So it's not a how should I say, a strange thing for Naomi to show up, but to show up without her men with her, it is strange, because people that are living in foreign lands, they have 3 times a year to show up. One of the 3 times a year they can show up to celebrate and bring their yearly offerings and gifts, okay, which they would turn it into their harvest in that Moab. They would turn it into money, and then from their money they would come there and they would turn it back into the gifts for the offerings. If it's sheep, if it's the grain offerings of one of the 7 species of the barley species, whatever it is, when they're doing the wave offerings or whatever, this is what they did when they came traveling from a far journey. And in verse 25 and 26, it's written, do not offer the blood of my slaughtering with leaven, and do not let the slaughtering of the festival of the Passover remain until morning. Bring the first of the first harvest of your land, of Yahuwah, of the Bayit Yasharel, or Bayit of Yahuwah, your Aloha. Do not cook a young goat in the mother's milk. Okay, stop right there. To kind of answer you little thing here, all right, is, and then they says, bring your first harvest. Now, when you read this here, it doesn't say first fruits. It only has bikorim, or the first crop. They add the word fruits there among the Hebrew tradition because they mean by fruits, you got to understand your first fruits is the fruits of your labor, whatever you labored on, whatever the labor is of your labor. If I was in cattle, I would trade it in for grain offerings, for the lifting up and the wave. I would trade it in for a lamb or a goat. I would trade it in. We would do trade as barter so I can have the right elements to use for the sacrifice of Pesach. But whatever is your first fruits of labor, because here in Ibrim, it's just bekor. It just means bekor or bekorim, which means the first of your harvest, the first of your crop. It doesn't mean grapes, oranges, and apples and things like just that. It means everything, okay? And of course, you might be questioning, you shall not see the kid in his mother's milk, okay? Now, this is thrown in there, and among rabbinical and the Ashkenazi and the Sephardic, they have their kosher or koshat kitchens where they separate the milk and the cheese and certain meats and dairy products separate from other fruits and vegetables and grains, and they don't let it touch each other and mingle unless they're, of course, eating it and then on the table. But when it's in certain areas, they keep it separate. But that is rabbinical Talmud. That is not scriptural. In actuality, now, you shall not see the kid in his mother's milk. That some of the pagans that worship certain particular deities, they would get the female take her milk and then get her newly born kid, and they would boil it and cook it. Of course, they skinned it and everything, prepared it, but they would boil it and cook it in the mother's milk. It was a delicacy meal among some of the pagans and sacrificed for their pagan deity. No one does this today that I know of. I have to really dig in research. If there's still pagans worshiping those pagan deities, doing this type of delicacy of taking the mother, freshly newborn kid, or 1 day old, whatever, and then butchering it and turning it around with the mother's full milk and then boiling it in the milk and cooking it. Nobody does that today, okay? Nobody's sacrificing like that today. This is an ancient tradition of a nearby tribe that was doing that particular sacrifice. And even in Torah, in the right rule of Torah, we do not, it says it very clearly in Wa'ikra, not that the kid, when it's born, you shall wait 1 year, and you do not take the kid, even if it's fat, too soon from the female goat and turn around, or cow, just the same, and turn around and sacrifice it as venal meat. All right? You don't do that. It says in the Torah, you have to wait 1 year for separation, they're weaned from their mother and separated before you do that. Now, the reason why, I'll tell you, with my experience with Chuck and the ranch with goats and sheep, that during the time of the kid goat, breastfeeding constantly young, a lot of times the mother right away don't feed them. We have to force her to feed the babies. We call them baby goats, but they're kids. And we used to have to tie her up and make her lay down to force it, because the first few days of the milk from the mother, has a lot of nourishment of antibodies and immune system against disease. So if the kid gets the right portion, she can be run off on her own and eat the grain and the grass and not get sick and die. And we were having trouble for a while where some of these female goats were being, I call them the B word, because they were not breastfeeding their kids and kicking them away, and the children were withering away, and we had to tie them down and force breastfeed them through the mother. And then after a few days, we didn't have to tie her no more. She was allowing it, because some of the kids, they would jump and they would bite with their little nub and teeth, and they would bite her breast, and it would be very uncomfortable, and someone would kick them off with their back ends, right? So we used to force it. Or if the mother died giving birth from cross, and we had to go with our hand and gloves and pull them out, and there's no mother, she died, then we would take the milk and then other milk of other of them, and we turn around and with a bottle and get her started, the kids started, and then we turn around, and usually other female goats would adopt them. They would adopt them. You'll see a white goat with black, brown, spotted, black, all black, with baby kids that lost their mothers, and she would take them in and adopt them. But at a certain age, she kicks them off. They have to start eating the green grass, okay? And but we have to force them the milk in the beginning stage, because it's better than formula, because it has the antibodies and the immunity bodies in the milk, so they can survive the winter seasons or the horrible heat of the sun and weather. So that's a little bit of what we learn in the ranch as sheep and goat herders, okay? So now, so we know it's first harvest. We know it's bikur. The word fruit is not there. There's a Hebrew word for fruit. It's not here, okay? So we know it's the fruits of your labor, and that's why they add it. But they say ha-bikurim. They don't say Rishit Katsir. The Rishit Katsir is the Hebrew word for that feast in the Torah of the 7 feasts. Rishit Katsir, the first the first harvest crop. Rishit Katsir is the correct word for the 7 feasts, not Ha Bikurim. They use that for their New Year celebration. Okay, so it's really a trip what the rabbinical do compare. Rashid,
I have a point.
You got a point?
My background, at each of these 3 feasts, it's the men who have to stand up at each of those feast periods. And not only do they show up, can they not show up empty-handed, but they have to give an account of how they've been leading themselves and the members of their family in Yahuwah's righteousness. Well, when they at each of these feast periods, it's the men who have to show up 3 times a year.
Correct. No women.
And when they
the women
show
can
up,
come, but it's mandatory.
Say again.
The women can join, but it's mandatory the men, and it could be your son, one of your sons that's old enough.
Each of those times when they show up, not only they have to have something in their hands, they have to have an offering, but they also have to give an account of how they've been leading their own lives and the members of their families' lives in Yahuwah's righteousness. Well, it's just that. It's a level of accountability that is taken seriously, because it's not a request, it's a requirement.
And I, one time I was in a shul I was staying with a rabbi friend of mine, and we were celebrating the feast with them, and not far from Rachel's tomb community, there was a French Yubilee, and he had an offering, and he waved the offering, but he came in his father's and his grandfather's stand. He was the son. He was over 25 years old, and he came in his father's place and grandfather's place with the accumulation of the offering, and he gave accountability of what's going on in France and their community, and they wanted the donation to go to a orphanage for widows, widows and orphanage, or widows and orphans, and that he did the wave offering, and he had the check to give them. I've also seen them wave a bag of money a bag of money, you know what I mean? Of doing this wave and in order to give as an offering, and they specifically wanted to go for their particular sect of Jewish traditional belief system that they were donated to. In chapter 23 of Shemot, verse 14, 3 times in the year you are to observe the festival to me. And here's the note, footnotes. Festival of Yahuwah are grouped in for 3 different times in the year. Guard the festival of unleavened bread. Mazoot, 7 yamin you eat unleavened bread, as I commanded you at the time appointed in the month of Abib, for in it you came out of Misharim, and do not appear before me empty-handed. And the festival of the harvest, and the first Rashik Chasir of your labors, which you have shown in the field, and the festival of ingathering at the outgoing of the year, when you have gathered in the fruit of your labors in the field. Now let's look at this here. Talking about Sukkot there, but let's look at this. He's talking about, it says fruit, but here it says in Hebrew the word ma'ash, ashe, or ma'ash. It's the transaction of your fruit, of your products of labor. Okay, your property, your labor of your property, of your possession from the fruits of your labor. All right, now let's go back to Ruth. So is everybody in understanding of what the reason why traditionally the Yehudim used Ruth as a parashat reading before the purpose of the Feast of Shavuot is because of the timeline that Naomi showed up with Ruth back to Bethlehem. So it's the timeline of the harvest that's going on. And it's also a spiritual timeline for her, because we know what the story, which we're about to read, of what takes place of the kinsman redeemer. So now let's go back to chapter 2. Naomi had a relative on her father's side, her husband's side, a man of great wealth, of the clan of Elimelech, and his name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabitess said to Naomi, please let me go to the field and glean the heads of grain after him, in whose eyes I find favor. So she said to her, go, my daughter. And she left and went and gleaned in the field, and after the reapers, as it turned out. She came to the part of the field belonging to Boaz, the near relative Elimelech, the mighty sovereign, or leader or ruler. Okay, he was a near of kin. There was one besides. Now you remember, if she left the land, what happens because of Yubilee a lot, and also Shmita, what happens if they abandon their land, their relatives are taking over the land and harvesting on Naomi's husband's land. Okay, this is going on. And then when if it's the right to return, it would be outright return. But the offerings in it, unless there was some left over after gleaning, will give to Naomi. But she had to work it still, even though it was part of her family inheritance. She would have to buy it back. So we're going to see how that. The redemption, the redeeming process takes place, of why they had to be redeeming with money to redeem the land back, right, to Naomi. Because if it's not in the proper time of Shmita, or even the time of, because it could be, some of it could be released during Shmita, but most of all of it is released during the time of the Yubilee. It's completely released back to the owners. Okay, and they left the land. They probably were in debt. They sold it to relatives. They took that money, and Naomi went with her husband and her sons, or had her sons there. We don't know. or went with her husband and the sons with finances. That's why it says in the beginning of chapter 1 that she went full but came back empty. So they must have sold their property to their land of their relatives. Of course, they would come back and get a release and an appointment time. They can buy it back, the remainder balance of the Yubilee, or family could give it back to them. They don't have to just sell it back. Most likely they're going to want a percentage back according to the yearly percentage calculation to the Yubilee. Okay, if it's getting closer to the Yubilee, there's still some money involved. All right. So in verse 4, and see, Boaz had come from Bethlehem and said to the reapers, Yahuwah be with you. And they answered him, Yahuwah baruch you. They had no problem calling Yahuwah by his Shem, of course, back then. A little footnote in verse 5, and Boaz said to his servants, who was appointed over the reapers, whose young woman is this? Who's this woman? Who's this girl? So the servant who was appointed over the reapers answered and said, it is the young Moabite woman who came back with Naomi from the fields of Moab. Verse 7, and she said, please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the reapers. And she came and has remained from morning until now. She sat a little in the house. And Boaz said to Ruth, personally, he said to her, you have heard, you have not, my daughter, do not go to glean in another field, nor go from here, but stay close to my young women. So he's letting them know, stay next to the women. Don't just stay distant by yourself. Hang out. Because the other Yehudi were probably distant to her because she's a Moabitess woman. Now, even though they're next of kin of Lot by the house of the family of Abraham, but they're not next of kin of Lot through the house of Yasharel. They're distant bloodlines, okay? And they do not get Torah. They did not get the right rule. They did not get the covenant unless they left the Moabites and came to Yasharel with their distant elder brothers and cousins and relatives to receive it and take it back to the land of Moab. But they're Ger. Their bloodline and a distant stranger alike. Let your eyes be on the field which they reap, and you shall go after them. Have I not commanded the young men not to touch you? And when you are thirsty, go to the vessels and drink from what the young men have drawn. So he gave a commission. You don't touch her. You don't get near her. You don't mishandle her. You don't horseplay with her. You know what I mean? Nothing. All right? You be shalom and respectful. Just because she's a ger, you treat her as that we were ger at one time. Now we return. Don't treat the ger strangers any more stranger and make them feel any more uncomfortable than it is. Don't pick on them. I remember when I was in Machpelah, in the place of my forefathers' burial, Abraham, Ishak, Yaakov, and they brought the first batch, no, it was actually the second batch of Manasseh from India. And when they brought them there, of course, the Yehudim rabbinical are trying to convert them, but they brought them fresh off the plane, probably a few days a week or whatever. They're taking them around Manasseh to do tourism, and they went to the memorial place of our forefathers, Abraham, Ishak, Yaakov. And when I watched the rabbinical of the Ashkenazis, they were distant. There were some of the Sephardic of my people would greet them. But I noticed they didn't hug them and kiss them. So when I noticed them when they were coming in the corridor, I went towards them and I went to their elder, hugged them and kissed them in both cheeks and said, shalom, welcome. And then their sons, and they all gathered around me and they had tears in their eyes because I was the only one that did that to them. The Ashkenazis looked at them as a foreign ger coming to their land, but yet the bloodline of the house of Manasseh. Okay?
Hallelujah.
So, and of course the other Ashkenazis felt convicted. And as they started walking, they started looking at him, greeting him, shaking their hand. But I was the only one that hugged him and kissed him on the cheek. You know what I mean? And they kept looking at me. And when I went outside, because I was there for a week, camped out in a tent in the grass in front of the place where there's a grass where you could camp out, of Machpelah, that when I was walking, they waved at me, and I went to talk to them further. They were immediately gravitated towards me because I showed the love of welcome to our people coming home. You know what I mean? But hallelujah. So, and this could have happened to Ruth. She kept at a distance. She stayed away from the house. She knew she was a girl. You know, she didn't know the customs. She probably knew a little Hebrew because she was married to one, and she was learning because of Naomi. But we don't know the communication language. We know that the Moabites inherently knew Paleo-Shemitic Hebrew. They knew ancient Hebrew, and at this time, they had even David's time. They had still Paleo-Hebrew. So it was probably maybe a 80% they can comprehend each other among the Moabites and the Israelites, because they all read and write a form of Shemitic Kitab Paleo-Hebrew, right? So it wasn't probably so foreign, but it'd be like an accent, somebody coming from Alabama, Louisiana, into California or something, and you could tell by their accent that they're a foreigner, right? But he gave the strict orders: don't touch her, don't play, don't mess with, don't manhandle her, nothing, okay? And give her respect. He's the boss, in charge, living large, so they're going to respect Boaz. Verse 10, and she fell on her face and bowed down to the ground and said to him, why have I found favor in your eyes that you should take notice of me, seeing I am a ger, or a foreigner? Now let's look at this, see if it's the same word. Okay, so this is the other word. I'm glad I brought it up, because this is the other word I want to show you. And this is nakri. Nakri. You write these down, ger. Not, you know, goy and you know goyim, plural for nations, but and you know ger. Okay, now you know nakri. Nakri. Okay, the phonetic sound here, as I'm showing you. A stranger, a foreigner. It says non-relative. Okay. Different, alien, foreign, outlandish, strange woman. So that word could be used for not just women, but also anybody. Okay. It says adulterous because they don't know. They don't know where they're at. So they won't even touch them. They would come, they could talk and distant, communicate, exchange water and, well and stuff like that. But they would not eat and bake bread and, exchange handheld bread without prayer and stuff like that. So there was a little distance because the Yubilee are trying to keep themselves clean, but I'm sure there's friendly people, more than friendlier than normal, that are labor workers of the harvest, and they're probably more open working with labor, outside labor. Just like if I would walk in the crowd of construction guys and I speak a little Spanish to open up, oye amigo, ¿cómo está? And and I don't know very much Spanish, but I open up like that and I show a little respect and friendliness with them, and then they open up to you. That you're friendly. You're not some gringo, standing over them, not understanding what they're saying and everything, or talk to them. Okay. So this is kind of so write this down of the nakri. And this is another form of stranger. All right. Boaz answered and said to her, I have been told all that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, and how you have left your father and your mother and the land of your birth, and have come to a people whom you did not know before. Yahuwah repay your work, and your reward is complete from Yahuwah Aloha of Yasharal, under whose wings you have come to seek refuge. And she said, Let me find favor in your eyes, Master, because you have comforted me and have spoken to the heart of your female servant, though I am not like one of your female servants. So she says, even though I'm not like your tribal people, you welcome me. Because if she's a part of Naomi's family, she's next of kin. She's family. You know, it'll be like, say, one of my distant relatives that is Navajo, and they come to be around me, and my house of Israel people in my house, and they look at her different. I said, "This is my blood. My cousin from the Navajo tribe come to visit me, and she knows Yahuwah and Yeshua. You know, she might not dress like you, look like you, know all your traditions, but accept her as my blood family." That's what Boaz is doing here, okay? And said to her, "Come here at mealtime. Then you shall eat of the bread and the dip and your piece of bread in the vinegar." And she sat beside the reapers, and he passed roasted grain to her, and she ate and was satisfied and had left over. Okay, so now she's getting closer to the family of the workers in Israel. Now she's more welcome because Boaz put the hammer down. She's blood, she's family, she's distant, but she is family. And of course, the Israelites are not thinking that Moabites are inherently bloodline from the family of Lot and Abraham, okay, cousin of Abraham. So, but they're not thinking that. Okay, they say they're too far away, too many years separation. They're probably contaminated. So this is going on with Sister Ruth, and this is a lovely story of what happened. And then it goes on, and so she was getting closer to the family. She was feeling closer, and she rose up to glean. And Boaz commanded his young men, saying, "Let her glean even among the sheaves, and do not harass her, embarrass her, or any kind of thing to go on against her." In verse 16, "Rather draw out from the bundle for her and leave it for her to glean, and do not restrain her. And she gleaned in the field until evening, and beat out that which she had gleaned, and it was about an ephah of barley." I remember traveling with my dad and my mom in the back seat of a 54 Chevy with that you have to stop about every gas fill up and put water, and once in a while you have to pull over when it's extremely hot, and you got this big gunny sack in front of your hood because there was no antifreeze back in those days, and there was no air conditioning in the car. You know, your air conditioning is that little fan in your window sticking your head out, and we're going through the desert, and we have to pull over, and you get the gunny sack, let the car cool, and you open the cap when the car's cool, and you pour water. If there's nowhere to get water and your car overheats, you got to pour water, let it get to you service every so many miles, and there was a field there. And people picnicked on the field. They gleaned the grapes, the apples, the oranges. On the side of the road, it was the law of California for travelers can get what they want to eat, but you can't take it to sell it, right? How many remember that?
I remember that. It still happens in certain barrios or campos.
Yes. I know in Indio they still have it. You know, they still do that by the Raz area where all the fields are. And the same thing of native land, they do that. Well, that's a tradition that comes from what they call Torah, right rule, or should I say the right rule of Torah, okay? It's the right rule of the word. In the modern day, they say Judeo-Christianity law, because most of our laws, they coin them Judeo-Christianity. Verse 18, "And she took it up and went into the city, and her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned, and she brought out and gave to her, and what she had left over after she was satisfied. Then her mother-in-law asked her, 'Where have you gleaned today? And where did you work? Baruch be the one who took notice of you.' And she told her mother-in-law, with whom she had worked, and said, the name of the man I work today with is Boaz. Oh, now she's going to know. Boaz knew already she's a next of kin. And Naomi said to her daughter, Baruch you, for who has not forsaken his kindness, who not forsaken your kindness to the living and the dead. And Naomi said to her, the man is a relative of yours, one of your redeemers. So she's letting her know right off the top, it's coming with land, redeeming, kinsman, redeemer. Okay, right off the top, he's not only family, he's also one of the redeemers that could give her seed to raise up seed in her womb of her husband that passed away. Okay, letting her know off the top. And Ruth the Moabitess said, he also said to me, stay close to my young people until they have completed all the harvest. Now, that's quite a long time of working on the field and having this great opportunity to clean and do the work continually, and also to get to know one another. Okay, there's also probably visual going on. He's monitoring her. He knows everything about her already because Naomi's back and the full story of Naomi has taken place. And so she's going to stay with him to the completion of the harvest. And Naomi said to Ruth in verse 22, her daughter-in-law, it is told, my daughter, that you go out with his young men working, and that they do not meet you in any other field. So she's going to stay appropriately in that particular field. Boaz is making sure there's plenty of leftover to glean for her. He's giving her favor. He's showing her the love of a kinsman redeemer, and she stayed close to the young man of Boaz to glean to the completion of the barley harvest and wheat harvest, but she dwelt with her mother-in-law. But at night she went home to be with her mother-in-law. You see, a lot of times, even today, when they go to kibbutzes, some of them don't live at the kibbutzes, and the kibbutz, they have a section for married women, men and women married quarters. They have a section for men by themselves in dormitory. And they have a section for women by themselves in dormitory. And some of them don't sleep there. They come from different parts of the villages to help them do the harvesting for the kibbutz. Okay, and you could join them freely, but it's a very socialist type of community living. Very little money's involved. It's mostly they get a ration out, equal ration out, depending on your labors of love and your work there. And if you don't live there, there's a little bit more. If you live there, there's a little less because you're living there and living in the quarters. So, but she dwelt with her mother-in-law. So she lived with her mother, and probably people are sleeping near a quarters, a campsite where they're cooking and feeding and eating, and they're working with the traveling as they're moving with the fields. Okay. All right. Now let's also look at Devarim. We're not going to go to chapter 3 yet. We're going to go to Devarim. Deuteronomy chapter, let's see, we're going to play with first. Let's go to 16, chapter 16, verse 9. Count 7 Shavuots for yourself. Begin to count 7 weeks from the time you begin to put the sickle to the grain. You hear that? Begin to count 7 weeks from the time you begin to put the sickle to the grain. Now we know that the first Yom of Shavuot is a high Shabbat. So it's like a preparation. So you're going from Pesach to Matzahot, and then the wave offerings, first fruit. Now you're going to begin a portion of, there's like a high Shabbat rest to get ready for work tomorrow. You know, children, go to bed early, get rest because you're going to work tomorrow. It's harvest time. And it's the count. Okay, to begin to count the 7 weeks from the time you begin to put the sickle to the grain. And you shall perform the festival of weeks to Yahuwah your Eloah according to the voluntary offering from your hand, which you give as Yahuwah your Eloah Baruch you. And you shall Kara, Shalah, Shimka, before Yahuwah, your Aloha, you and your son and your daughter and your male servant and your female servant and the Levite, and who is within your gates. You hear that? Who is within your gates, and the strangers, and the fatherless, and the widow are in your midst, at the place where Yahuwah, your Aloha, chooses to make his name dwell. So this is an order to put for the future, wherever he puts his name to dwell. Okay, it could be at the border of the gate of the tribe. For them, it was the Bayit Lakim, in that area of Bethlehem, and also for the house of Yehuda. And so that's a portion of Yehuda. It's not complete. All the tribes living there, portion of Yehuda. And so, and you could be at the borders of your tribe, of your people coming together, place where they place the name. And then eventually when they put the Bayit Kodal, the big house, they call temple, that is where they also decided to make it a general place of taking your offerings from now on, okay, during the feast, because it's not too far of a distance. So now let's look at something here. Your son, your daughter, your manservant, your maidservant, your Kohen Levi within your gates. So they even have Levi within their gates, because remember how certain times the Levi would set up a post. Today we call them shuls or shivas. They call them synagogues, but shul or shivas at the gate of the particular tribe. They're not necessarily in the city, but they're at the gate of the 12 tribes, and they're ministering to them and making sure they're doing everything appropriate during the seasons and the feasts, and they're accepting the wave offerings to do the work. Okay, now they could take it from their hand from Bethlehem and take it to when they later on, because right now when this is written, they're not there yet, but when they could take it later in their hand, the offerings and mules, and take it up to the house of Yahuwah in Jerusalem, and they can wave the offering there. But they started the procedure as the Levite that's within their gates. Okay, and then it says that they have their little temporary housing, or so say a Shiva Shul, a shul, a place to fellowship and minister and teach Torah, excuse me, like they do today, and the stranger. And here is ger, the word ger, or gar, ger. It's phonetically spelled G-E-R, but it has the sound of ger because it has the arch mark, the little A-frame arch mark on the top of the E, making it an A sound. So it's ger, which is a guest, a foreigner, guest, alien, sojourner, a stranger, but he's a guest. In other words, he has a visa, he has a permission slip, he has a work permit to be there. Okay, he is not an idol worshiper. He doesn't practice idol worship and paganism in your land of Yisrael, and he's starting to learn how to function in Torah and the right rules, not only to respect it if he's going to keep it, or to learn it and respect it to keep it himself. So write down this spelling also as another form besides what you learned earlier, okay, of another form of a foreign alien, but being grafted in preparation. And fatherless, and a widow. Now, what was Ruth? She was not only a stranger, a gar, but she was also almana. She was a widow. Okay, everybody knew that. So there's a twofold thing on her. And you have to give respect according to Torah. All right? And that are among you in the place which Yahuwah your Aloha has chosen to place his Shem there. So wherever it is, and you shall remember that you was a bondman in Misarim, and you shall observe and do these statutes. So he's always reminding us that at one time we were also a bondman, okay? And so, and when you go to Israel, you don't get that respect from everybody. They keep Torah. Some look at you as a stranger, foreigner, American, American. You know, they look at you with a frown, a bunch of tourists, American, you know. And so, but if you show yourself to be Torah observant, you're wearing your tzitzits. You don't have to wear white and black, but you have your tzitzits. I wear my knitted crown, and they see me that I look observant and clean. Then they kind of open up. Some of them could get religious prejudice too, you know, not being aware of where you're at spiritually. Also, 3 times in a year shall all your males appear before Yahuwah your Aloha in the place which he shall choose, in the feast of unleavened bread, in the feast of weeks, and the feast of tabernacles. All right. Is it made clear to everybody? These out of the 7 feasts are the specific feasts that you as men or your son in the place of the father can take the offering and the accountability to the Bayit Kadal. These are the specific, write down the verse, because the other one said 3 times a year, but didn't tell you specifically what were the names of the feasts. So it is the Feast of Unleavened Bread, Mazahot. Of course, if you're eating Mazahot, you're most likely eating Peshach. All right. And the Feast of Weeks, that's what we're doing. And then the Hag of Tabernacles. All right. The Hag of Sukkot. So those are the main 3 ones that you have to come. Try your best, one of the 3 of these 3 to make it, not only with the offering, but also with accountability. Like Brother measured up to share. What are you doing? Of course, when I seen the Frenchman, when he gave an accountability, we are prosperous. We have 5 more bakery stores in different regions. We have a clothing store shop now. They give accountability of how they're giving favor, receiving favor, and the Berekot and the Baruch and the Barakat of Yahuwah, of Abraham, Ishak, Yaakov, in a foreign country of France. They're not making aliyah, but they're bringing their offering to the place they want to bring it to, that has their name on the door, because in these shuls they have the name of Yahuwah. They have a big mezuzah there, and that's where you place his name on the borders, on the border of the particular community. They also have like a larger mezuzah for the community gate entrance, and so there's different forms of his name at the gate of your tribe or your people, right up to your doorstep of going in. The verse 17, every man shall give as he is able, according to the Baruch of Yahuwah, your Aloha, which he has given you. And it shall be when you come into the land which Yahuwah, your Aloha, has given you as an inheritance, you should possess it and dwell in it. That you should take some of the first of all of your fruits of your labor, of the soil, which you bring from your land, that Yahuwah, your Aloha, is giving you, and you shall put it in a basket and go to the place where Yahuwah, your Elohim, Aloha chooses to make his name dwell there. And of course, this is a future tense when they end up being, because the tabernacle was made and they did it around the tabernacle. And then eventually when they went into the land through the Jordan, and they went to, eventually the tabernacle went into the Hebron, and eventually they moved everything into Jerusalem when Shalomo finally built the first Bayit Kodal. Okay, so, but here it says, this is before all those things happened, but you could do it wherever he places his name, wherever they place the mezuzah, wherever they place the gate of the entrance of that particular village, that particular clan, that particular tribe of the clan, wherever they put his name. And you shall come to the one who is priest in those Yomim, and say to him, I shall declare today to Yahuwah your Aloha that I have come to the land which Yahuwah swore to our fathers to give us. And the Kohanim shall take the basket from your hand and place it before the altar of Yahuwah your Aloha. And you shall answer and say before Yahuwah your Aloha, my father was a perishing Aramin, and he went down to Mizraim and sojourned there with few men. And there he became a nation great and mighty and numerous. But the Mizraim did evil to us and afflicted us and imposed hard labor. Now, I'm going to open up for a little question here as we're talking about the offering and the wave and everything as we're getting into this. You're probably wondering about verse 5. And he shall answer and say before HaRuachEliyahu, my father was a perishing Aramim, and he went down to Mizraim and sojourned there with a few men, and there he became a nation great and mighty and numerous. So they're letting you know a little bit of the root of the understanding. Now, if I pull it up in King Amish, here it says Syrian, but we know the Arameans lived in that area. Now, we know Abraham was from the Chaldeans, okay? Abraham from the Chaldeans and his offspring, Abraham, Jacob, and of course we know Jacob became Yasharel, and that became the house of his 12 sons, or actually Levi too, 13th one later. So the house of the 12 tribes, okay, of Yasharel through the son. But the bloodline of the Chaldeans, where he's explaining to you that they were the Arameans, or in Syria, the Syrian Empire at one time, okay, in Mesopotamia. All right. So if they check somebody's blood and they say, well, you're Yehudi, but you're Yehudi Yasharel from the Mesopotamia, and if somebody's blood comes high percentage of Mesopotamia, this is Aramean. It could be partially Syrian or of the Chaldees where Abraham came from. Okay. So if anybody has this question, now this is a power word. This is a power sentence. If I were to go to, I'm not going to do it. The Sanhedrin is different, is developed now. But if I were to go to the Sanhedrin and I were to show my bloodline, and my bloodline say was Abraham, and my bloodline is not Aaron, is not of the Aaron, right? But say it was, and I say this sentence. And I say this sentence in Hebrew to say the high rabbinical in Jerusalem today. My father was a perishing Aramim, and he went down to Mizraim, and he sojourned, which we know that's Ger, right, or Neker, there with a few men. And there he became a nation great, mighty, and numerous. But the Mizraim did evil to us and afflicted us and imposed hard labor on us. And then he cried out to HaRuachEliyahu, our Abba, and Yahuwah heard our voice and saw our affliction and our toil and oppression. If you were to say that today, they have to honor you. And only Yehudi know this. Only they know this code sentence. Because you're saying you came from the house of Jacob, which is Israel. You exited Egypt. And when you exit France, United States, or another country into Yasharel, you are exiting a form of Egypt or Babylon because of the sinful condition. But we know that going to Israel is not Kodesh. Kodesh has a lot of Babylon and Egypt already mixed in it still, among the Ashkenazi. They got a lot of Babylon and Egypt mixed in their belief system from the Kabbalist belief system of Kabbalistic type of belief system that's mingled in their Torah of Mishnah, or should I say their commentary of form of the Torah, all right, of the Talmud.